back. I've convinced him to come back and do it again. In fact, he's back for the rest of the season. This is a treat not only for me, it's a treat for the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, from The Athletic, it's Michael-Shawn Dugar, covers the Seahawks, co-host of the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast, where you can find anywhere where you get your podcast. We're going to call the Dugar Report. I just think that's great. It's just got a great catch to it, a great feel to it. The Dugar Report. Michael-Shawn Dugar is going to be with us every week here on Thursdays, giving us a Seahawks report for the rest of the season. I'm glad the guilt trip worked.
I love being on with you, Puck. Also, that when you have a kid under 2, scheduling anything is just so tough. Naps, food, date nights, laundry, let alone work. So,
did you say date night? You're getting a date night still in?
Yeah. Well, we try to. We try to. It's tough. It is tough. Me and my wife already work conflicting schedules. So on top of me traveling every other weekend and then just being exhausted, it's I can't wait for the off season. Where I can really spend some time.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Heading into the Niners game, I thought, you'll be getting a kickstart in your offseason pretty quickly. How that game's probably going to go, and then how the Arizona game's going to probably go, and we'll talk. We'll be doing the rest of our visits talking about the draft. Lo and behold, Mike, they go and win the damn game, and now they've changed all the expectations for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's weird how much of a swing these games have. In terms of just psychological momentum and all that stuff too, but just like literally the math on it. Like, for instance, I'll read you something from our, we have like a guy who does the equivalent of ESPN's FPI that measures like the projections of their odds or stuff like that. So this week, right? I checked it for this week. He says, and he runs this model like 1,000 times and gets the, whatever the nerds do to get these numbers. I really don't know. Yeah, well, he's got the methodology at the bottom of the page, which is great because, I'm not going to read it, but I just trust him. So he says with a win, the Seahawks playoff odds go up from 11% to 21%, and their odds of winning the division go up from 8 to 16. So those double. He says with a loss this Sunday, they go down the playoff odds to 4%, and their division winning odds go down to 2%. I think that's the biggest swing in any game. Any team's playoff odds this week. The Cardinals have a pretty big swing too, but those are the Seahawks specific odds. That's huge in week whatever we're in.
Imagine if they get this win.
Mm-hmm. And I think 2 of the other teams play NFC games this week. I think the Rams are at the Eagles, and then the Niners are the Packers.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So some other NFC games this week. It's the division truly is wide open. I don't know how likely the Seahawks are to win it, but winning on Sunday against the Niners literally changed the math on everything.
I didn't think they'd go down there and win. I just thought that with everything that was going on, fact is that they got ran out of their own building. Without Christian McCaffrey, they couldn't stop their running game. He was back. You've got you got your center quitting halfway during the week. Abe Lucas is back, but who knew how he was going to play, and the whole linebacking situation. It's a credit to them. It's credit to the coaching staff, credit to the players to just kind of, buckle it down and turn out the best performance they had this season.
Yeah, I was surprised. What stood out to me that week, and then the week after that, this week, I guess, was how Mike Macdonald pretty much. He doesn't subscribe to the whole Pete Carroll treat everything like a championship opportunity. He's willing to acknowledge, like, hey, some games, like, this is something. Like, we can acknowledge, we can be human and say, this is something. They've been kicking our ass. I'm tired of them kicking our ass, and we can treat this week like a bunch of guys who are tired of getting their ass kicked. There's some drawbacks potentially to that. You can play down to your opponent in some instances, but this week, that Niners week, I think it was necessary. If they had gone in like, just another game, it's a division one, so it matters more. But we're treating this like every other week. I looked at those guys and I'm like, that's BS. Yeah. Particularly the guys who had been part of, like Tyler had lost to them, I think all 6 times, like physically been on the field for all 6 games,
right?
In the losing streak. DK, I think Charles Cross. Like there's some dudes who, like Charles, for instance, before Sunday, he never even beaten the Niners in his career. I didn't even know what that felt like
No.
before Sunday. So I'm glad that I thought it was very interesting, and I actually am on that side of the philosophy there of you can treat some games like they're like, yo, this does matter.
Yeah.
There's something to rivalries. There's something to the psychological effect of standing up to the school bully, so to speak, which what the Niners were to those guys for 3 years.
What was it? I mean, I'm just trying to think back. What was the messaging? How was his tone different leading up to that game?
It was just as simple as like this is a big game. Just that small,
Just
from here.
acknowledging it.
Yeah, hearing Pete so much, this is a championship opportunity every week, which was fine. I don't, Pete gave the backstory on how he got to that. I think he hyped up a Notre Dame game one time and they went there and got shellacked. So he was like, never again.
And
So I
I
understand.
get it though, and I've always understood his approach, but I also see the other side to it, like Macdonald, like you're saying.
Yeah, because and then it's right. It's you can apply it situationally. Like every game, some games legitimately like are big because of the math. The division may be on the line or whatever. You maybe shouldn't hype up a primetime game just because that's a little dangerous of a slope to get into. But yeah, man, your division rival's been kicking your butt, punching you in the mouth, just beat you at the crib on Thursday Night Football not too long ago. Yeah, it's just a simple fact. McDonald was like, yeah, this is a big game. We need this. Even this week, he was like, these are playoff games now. We're treating
Sure.
this like playoff games, not just because every game is a playoff game, legitimately because he's like, I can see the standings. We can't afford to lose, so we got to treat every game like it is our last because of the hole we've dug ourselves. Mike McDaniel in Miami is using similar psychology with his team. He's like, yo, we sucked for like a month. So now we can't lose. Everybody lock in, which is the right mindset to have because it's true. That's part of the math of it.
What surprised you most about the game?
That they were the more physical team, which they had not been in any of the matchups. Run defense in particular, there's some scheme to it for sure. But after like the first couple drives by each team, no one's reinventing the wheel with their plays, right? They're either running outside zone, inside zone, gap stuff. Maybe there's some pullers here, like power. There's only so much stuff you run in the NFL. All of it is predicated on, for the most part, moving someone off the ball. And on defense, it's predicated on getting off your block. It's not rocket science, and to be able to do that consistently and not allow explosives, I thought that was really impressive. I guess I'm focusing more on the defense because their run game did nothing. But I just thought that was the part that really stood out, especially when I went back and watched the film. It was the fact like, oh, they played like a team tired of losing. You could feel it, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. Offense, you could too, particularly later in the game. But yeah, defensively, I could almost feel the desperation watching it live, talking to guys after the game, and then even watching the film later. You could really see guys where the defense was not going to let them lose that game. They did some schematic stuff too. That helped a lot, and it helped that they didn't have Kittle, that they didn't have Ayuk, two of the Seahawks killers, pretty much in this rivalry. But I think just the effort to be the more physical team, to punch them in the mouth first, it really stood out from the first drive when the Niners went 3-and-out.
Yeah, I think since the Denver game, I mean, they tackled well. Other than, Jennings was a beast and was just running through tackles left and right. And I mean, he just was more physical. I don't think it was missed tackles other than him just being a physical wide receiver, but it was I think the sure tackling, Mike. I think the gang tackling nature of it. I think those two linebackers being in the right spots and making plays, the defensive line, collectively, they just were swarming to the football. And, I don't know if it was, hey, man, we got a reality check, the week before. They took a guy who was our leading tackler and they threw him out. They threw him out outside and just out off the porch and said, see you later. We don't need you. And maybe that was the wake-up call. I don't know. I mean, it's you're inside that locker room. You talk to those guys. Did you get a sense of that was kind of a shot to those guys, what they did there with Dotson?
It varied because some guys have just seen a little bit more. Some guys, like if you were here since 2017, so pretty much like Jared Reed and Tyler Lockett, you saw them try and trade Jeremy Lane, and then the trade get like shut down because Jay Lane couldn't pass a physical. He was supposed to be in the Dwayne Brown trade. And then I think Sherm got hurt. So they needed Jay Lane to start. Not only are you still on the team after we tried to trade you, now we need you to start on Monday Night Football against the Falcons, which all happened within like 3 weeks, funky stuff like that, where you try to break up with someone, but they won't move out or give your key back.
But Mike, didn't even Reed admit that he had never seen something like that?
He probably hasn't seen your leading tackler get punted, but when he said that he hadn't seen anything, I'm like, dude, you saw that Jay Lane stuff, which was weird, But so it varied, and like Ernest Jones, he said, I'd been traded twice in the last 3 months, so nothing surprises me anymore. So his perspective is a little different, and some guys have been on some really dysfunctional organizations. Leo and Jay Love are coming from the Giants, so they've seen a little bit of dysfunction. The same with Geno. Geno played for both New York teams, which they were both dysfunctional when he was there. Geno literally got his first and only start in New York, and they fired his coach the next morning, for starting him. So he's seen a little bit of everything, not to mention how he lost his job with the Jets. So talking to different guys, it all just kind of varied. The young dudes were like, yo, that's something. And then some of the vets were like, hey, man, it's a business. They all just saw Jerome Baker get punted on, about a month ago. So it varied. Everyone was it was a wake up call for some guys. It was like a welcome to the NFL for some of the young bucks to see, like, oh my God, but I really think the way they played, you could see after the game too, like they really wanted to shut the Niners up, because it's not just like the Niners were beating them too; they were talking shit the whole time. Like did Lenore talks, even Fred talks a little bit. Their linemen talk. Juwan Jennings don't shut up. I've had Seahawks players for years tell me they hate that guy. I'm like, what's up with the Niners? Who you hate the most? I'm like 15. Yeah. I want to kill 15. And that's been that case for years. And that's Juwan Jennings. So I think it was like the end of a movie where they had been getting punked. And they finally stood up before the credits started rolling. That's what it felt like more than anything last week.
Yeah. It was a hell of a performance. I really thought, I don't know, looking back to the game, and we were talking, God, I think this was with Danny Kelly from The Ringer. And we got down the rabbit hole of talking about like the LOB and talking about Earl Thomas. I think Earl Thomas was in the news, not before the Hall of Fame stuff. I think we brought up the Josina Anderson interview and he's alive. I haven't heard from Earl Thomas since he was having a three-way with his brother. I mean, that was like the last thing I'd ever heard of from Earl Thomas. And Danny brought up something. He's like, what's been missing is that attitude that group played with, that bravado, that swagger that they had, that they brought to the field. And he goes, what stood out to me, the game is that the guy that's the closest to that and it's been missing for a while is Devin Witherspoon. You see a lot of that in Witherspoon, how he carries himself to how those guys used to carry themselves on the field. And I thought it was just a great point because they have been missing that alpha dog male for a while on that defense. And, normally it's maybe it's a bigger player in stature, what have you. I think it can be anyone. But to me, it's been missing. And I think Witherspoon brings that to that defense. Not only does he bring it, and he brought it, that game against San Francisco, Mike, but I mean, he was everywhere. He was making play after play after play. And this is a guy, right? I mean, who's been talked about from some that not having the best of seasons. But boy, he was one of the best players, if not the best player on that field on Sunday.
Yeah, I think what's been missing is the attitude, but also the performance too. Like you can't just talk shit and suck. No one wants to hear that. You can't bark at the other team when you're down 18.
That's
you
what
just
I do.
Can't. You got to make plays for people to really respect. The attitude. You can't do your sack dance if you don't get a sack. You can't taunt the other team. You can't do the Steph Curry celebration if you're Geno until you score. They had to back it up. I think a lot of these guys have that attitude. I know Jay Reed has it. Ken Walker has it too. I know DK has it. He wants to fight one of these guys pretty much every time he plays the Niners. He was willing to scream. That's why he screamed at Grubb last time they played them. He's like, dude, I can run by these dudes. Trust me, I got this, but he didn't get to run by those guys. So he didn't get to, talk his stuff. So I think it's a combination of the two things. I think a lot of dudes have that in them. It'll come out of them. when they are performing as well. I think Julian Love is quietly one of those dudes. Like, he's off the field, he's super buttoned up. Reminds me of Cam Chancellor a little bit, where it's like the nicest dude in the world type of dude to like help you to your car. Like, if he sees someone struggling on the side of the road, he'll probably pull over and help you push your car. Like, Julian Love's that type of dude. And then he gets on the field and he's trying to just knock heads off, you know? But if he's not knocking heads off, he can't really strut his stuff, you know? So I think they had to put it together, you know, and I thought that's what they did a really good job of. And then Ernest Jones seems to be like that too. You know, one of my homies, who's like an avid film guy, he watches the whole league, so he didn't get a chance to watch the Seahawks until like Tuesday. He texted me Monday when he saw the numbers. He was like, "Yo, what'd the Seahawks do?" I texted him back. I said, 13 is the real deal. It's Ernest Jones. I said, when you turn on that film, you're gonna see 13 all over the place, and he brings them attitude and toughness as well, because he's a ball player, very much like Spoon. The game is just natural to him, and they were feeding off him on Sunday as well.
You know, it's weird with him, and I think this is where analytics and the numbers and the eyes, right? It doesn't always tell the same story. Because I'm with you. I watch. There's two parts of this, I guess, question. It's multiple parts, but you know, I think the extension talk with him is a little premature. I understand where it's coming from. It's 3 games. I think we need to relax just a little bit. But I understand why people want to go there. The other thing, though, with that, which is not really the point, but you watch him and he makes plays all over the field. You're just sitting on your couch watching him. You're like, oh, there's another play. There's 13 again, 13 again. You pull up the numbers and you look at like PFF hates him. And I just don't like. And again,
yeah, that was weird.
It's not a love affair. Like, again, this is why I don't think you can always be all numbers and all eyes. There's always going to be a mixture of all the things. But you look at PFF rankings of him, and you're like, they don't think he's good. I mean, for the season, he's ranked behind Baker. He's ranked behind Dotson. Cody Barton is ranked ahead of him. And, again, I'm not spending all my time watching Cody Barton, but I watched Dotson and Baker. And I'm like, there's just no way. I mean, this guy is leaps and bounds better than those two. It's a weird thing how I guess analytics can play a part in that, but I'm with you. I think Ernest Jones has been a great find there by John Schneider. Been a hell of a linebacker for him.
Shout out to Cody Barton though. He's been making some splash plays. I think he had another pick, I think, in that win over the Falcons. Yeah, he's playing well over there in Denver. I do think, what was interesting somewhat to that point is analytics and just conventional football wisdom as well will tell you that you have premier positions: edge, corner, receiver, tackle, yada yada. And I think it was last week, either this week or last week, Mike Macdonald was asked, if you had the number 1 pick in the draft and you had to pick a defensive player, what position would you go with? And he said conventional wisdom tells you probably take a guy who can affect the quarterback. But he wanted to also mention, let's not devalue the guys who are effectively the spine of your defense. He was talking about backers, safeties, interior defensive linemen. And I've been talking about that with some of my other film nerds, because the more I watch, the more you see that's where your identity comes from. Like, you can have stars at the other spots, so you can have a TJ Watt or a Myles Garrett, or look at the Seahawks. Mike B was a great guy off the edge, and Cliff. But your spine is going to tell you how physical your team is. If you can have Myles Garrett on one edge and TJ Watt on the other, if you got a bunch of softies up your safeties, your backers, and your nose tackles or whatever, you are going to get run on. You're going to lose. You're going to lose every game, every week. I promise you. Because those guys, they define your toughness and your attitude, and that's where it really starts. And those guys are really involved in pretty much all of the action all the time, because they're in the middle, particularly your inside backers. So, to the point about Ernest, that's where he kind of shows up. You can't get away from him. Like you said, you're watching the game live on the broadcast, and you're like, wow, 13 is everywhere. You know, it's very much like Bobby used to be like, wow, 54. You look up and he's got like 12 tackles for the game. That part of the game, I do think, is going to start to come back a little bit. And it's not gone on the field, but when I say that, I mean contracts and maybe how teams are marketed and draft status. Like, you're going to see, I think, a little bit more of these guys who play just up the spine at any 3 levels getting a little bit value, a little bit more, because teams are going to want to be tough. Every new coach says at every press conference, we want to be physical. We want to own line of scrimmage, yada, yada, yada. You can't do that with a pass rusher. You can't do that with a shut. I love Sauce Gardner. He's not making the Jets tough. He just can't from that position. You know what I mean? Like Quinnen Williams can, right? So I think we're going to see a shift there, and I thought it was notable. Mike Macdonald kind of subscribes to that, like, I need my spine to be a bunch of dudes, right? It's not just the guys who rush the passer.
And I also think history repeats itself. I mean, not just in society, but also in sports. I mean, listen, I'm much older than you, and we don't need to tell him how much older I am than you. But when I was growing up, the best player on your defense was your middle linebacker. It's just Mike Singletary, Ray Lewis, Dick. I mean, I'm not old enough to remember Dick Butkus, but the point is that the best player was always the middle linebacker, always. And then it shifted, and then we, in a weird way, it felt like the same time we started devaluing maybe the running back. I don't know. Then it was like, you can draft a middle linebacker kind of anywhere, or you can draft a running back anywhere. I agree with you, and I think really it's a point you can make in all sports, talking about being tough, being sure up the middle. In baseball, they say it all the time in baseball: catcher, shortstop, center field, up the middle. I think you could even take it to basketball in a way and say point guard, center. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of middle when you line up, but it's the same thing. Solid point guard, solid center. You're tough on the front, you're tough on the back. And to your point, D tackle, middle linebacker, safety. It's kind of I remember when he answered that, it was I think refreshing to hear him say that.
Yeah, no, it was for me as well. The more I watch, because I don't watch just the Seahawks these days. Like the last, I want to say 3 seasons, I've spent a lot of time, maybe even going back to 2020. I started watching a lot more of the other teams, in part in 2020 because I just needed to see what good pass coverage looked like, because they were so bad. I was like, what is it supposed to look like? So I started watching some of the good teams. I was like, oh, okay, that helped me know, because that was a COVID year too, so I couldn't go in the locker room and ask who busted this coverage, right? I just had to figure out what the coverage is and what it's supposed to look like. So when you really watch other teams, you just see what matters, and you see where the difference makers are. I watched the Niners, and Fred Warner's a difference maker. When they had Hufanga back there, his reason he was all pro, he was a difference maker. It's just harder to avoid those guys who play in the middle wherever they play. Teams were able to avoid Sherm. You watch, remember that Steelers game in 2015? I think he shadowed Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown had 60 yards. But then somebody else had 200, because you can avoid a guy, but it's hard to avoid Bobby. It's hard to avoid Fred. It's hard to avoid Roquan Smith if you watch the Ravens. So I that stood out to me as well. And I wonder how I was kind of projecting long term when I really heard it. I was like, how's that going to work with John? How's that going to work with his staff when it's time to? Because they're going to have to hit reset, I think, at some point. The money just doesn't work out. There's a ton of guys that got to get paid. So what positions do you value? Because that's what it's going to come down to when they kind of reshuffle things, which I think they'll have to do this year, no matter where they end up finishing.
Yeah. It's amazing. The razor edge line that it is between win and loss in the National Football League. If you go back to that game and we've talked about this all week, had the officials done the correct thing in penalizing Seattle for calling the back-to-back timeouts and had penalized them for it, San Francisco's looking at a 4th and 1, right? Mm-hmm. Now, they're probably going to go for it. All likelihood, let's just say they get it or they settle for the 55-yard field goal from Moody, whatever. The alternate universe, San Francisco wins that game. And just think about the narrative this week that we're talking about this team. Because, we talked about it a little bit last week, and I just think overall for the season is, they've been undisciplined, they've been sloppy at times, not knowing what they're doing, what personnel they're in, running guys late onto the field, having to take timeouts. And if that had happened last week and the result was different, man, just think about it. We are talking, Mike, totally different about that outcome with San Francisco and really just, where we're at right now with Mike Macdonald.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you see the flip side of it with what's going on in San Francisco. Go just dive into go read any Niners writers this week or Niners podcast or Niners radio. And it's like, there's people either making the argument for or against keeping Kyle Shanahan. And the fact that no matter where you stand on it, the fact that that's even a part of the discourse down there in California right now speaks to how big of a swing, to go back what we were talking about earlier, these games are. If they can get a yard against the Rams, they're totally different
Right.
Tyrell Dotson might still have a job here, if they get a yard against the Rams, or if they were able to get a yard against the Niners, that game maybe looks a little different yesterday. It doesn't look as maybe heroic with Geno,
Right.
but because it panned out that way, look how Geno looks different now. Geno hadn't said anything about contract
100%.
stuff all year. He has a game-winning drive and hops on Richard Sherman's podcast and was like, "Yeah, I'm top tier." And the numbers and the film backs it up.
He said
it. Oh yeah. He said, Sherman talked him up, and he took Geno took the bait. He was like, "Yeah, where do I see myself? I see myself with the top tier quarterbacks." He said, "My numbers speak for me." He said, "My film says it too." Yeah, that's a quote. He hadn't said anything like that all season. They get that game-winning drive, beating the Niners finally. These games they change everything. Sometimes it's just something so small, and that's what particularly the division games do. But that's also what they do when you don't have a margin for error.
Yeah,
because I can see why people are frustrated with Kyle down there because they're in fourth now. That's tough. Like they're in fourth place in the division. They can climb out of it, but man, they got Green Bay next week and then Buffalo after that.
Yeah.
They could not really afford to lose to Seattle. I can see why the sky's falling
because
down.
I think it's not only just that. It's not only losing to Seattle with what's on the horizon, but it's also there's going to be talk, and rightfully so, with what's on the horizon for them in the offseason, because you start to see that window for them shrink. And they have been in this unbelievable situation the last few years down there. Seattle went through the same thing, that eventually when you've got to pay the quarterback and that guy commands a lot of money, it just restricts you what you can do in terms of keeping other people around you. Yes, you can draft, but the other guys that are going to have contracts, you have to make them expendable now because of the money that you're going to pay the quarterback. So I can see the frustration down there. I mean, it's great. It's wonderful. If you're a Seahawks fan, you want them to, in the pit of misery. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a reality, I think, that's hitting those fans. And I think probably some in the organization that, oh shit, man, this was supposed to be the year.
Well, also,
really hit the fan.
But to your point, the flip side could have been pretty much said about the Seahawks. I forget how.
Right.
I was looking at which guys need to get paid. I forget what little rabbit hole I fell down while I was working on a story today. But look at these guys. There's some of these guys that got to get paid. I wrote a list because I was texting one of my friends. I was like, this offseason might get a little dicey. These are the guys who reasonably could.
And they're way over, right, Mike?
Oh, yeah. They're already in the hole. So keep in mind, these are the guys that could need new contracts going into the offseason. DK, Geno, Ken, Abe, Charles, Reek, Boye, Ernest. Those are guys either headed for unrestricted free agency, which is the case with Ernest, and then everyone else I named is just going into the last year of their deal after this, with the exception of Charles, who has the 5th-year option.
Yeah.
But if you're smart, you probably should get ahead of that. But either way, he can go to the negotiating table. All of those guys, all of their agents can call John and be like, let's talk. Whether they get paid or not is whatever. But I mean, it's a lot of hard
conversations with, Draymond Jones, Nwosu, Tyler Lockett. I mean, those are just three to come to mind right off the top of my head.
Yeah, and those are the we would be having those conversations today if they had lost.
Right.
Just like the Niners have to do that.
Yeah, but I also think that's a conversation that they will have to have.
Oh yeah. No matter how the season ends, even if it ends with the Super Bowl, I mean, you have to have some. That's a lot of guys. That's pretty much half your 2022 class. Your number one receiver and your quarterback.
Yeah. It's well, we'll get there. We got plenty of more shows to do and discuss that for sure. Abe Lucas, I thought he looked fantastic. I mean, I was blown away how good he looked. I mean, I thought he was going to really struggle at times. I know he gave up. To me, it only felt like he really gave up one pass rush or one sack to Bosa. I don't know how much maybe Charbonnet didn't help him with that, but my God, the first play of the game, Mike, I don't think it's Bosa, but he takes his defender and he drives him 4 or 5 yards off the football. And I mean, you could just tell. I watched him specifically. That's all I watched when they were on offense. You could just tell the difference immediately with him out there on that offensive line.
Oh yeah, and the sack you're mentioning, Zach, I'm almost 1,000% sure was supposed to help, because Zach just blocks no one. Like, he just watches Nick Bosa get to Geno earlier in the game, and the way Abe kind of sets in his pass set, it almost looks like he's leaving his outside shoulder open as if like, oh, okay, Zach's gonna have my back, and then he just kind of doesn't. But I've always thought Abe, after their rookie year, I thought Abe was their best lineman. I know Charles was picked higher. I always thought Abe was their best guy. His physicality is what really stands out. It stood out in the preseason his rookie year as well. It stood out all of his rookie year in the run game in particular. He hit a rookie wall a little bit. They had a couple games back to back, I think, against like Brian Burns, Bosa, and like Max Crosby in a row in like November, December. That was a tough stretch for him. But in general, I always thought he was their best guy. And honestly, quietly, Sunday's game kind of reinforced that. Charles was on his back a few
Cross
times.
Didn't play well.
Yeah, and Geno bailed him out a few. I'm pretty much all of them except for one. And yeah, Charles was on his back a few times going against not Bosa, but like Gross Matos and Leonard Floyd, guys who were decent, but if a top 10 pick, we're talking about him maybe getting a new deal. I don't want you on your back going against Leonard Floyd, So that reinforced what I've always thought, that Abe is they're both difference makers because they're tackles, but of the two, Abe is that guy. He's much bigger too. He's just a huge, massive human. Moves really well, and he's a little bit of an asshole. Like he plays like one. Not personality wise. I don't know Abe.
He is a lot that.
Yeah, like I think he was like a pro Rolo guy. I think when he was at Wazoo, and the pro Rolo guys were like wired a little different. Different is the adjective I'll settle on.
Yeah.
But it's at certain positions I don't care. Like if my linemen are Rolo guys, okay, that's cool. Because you're probably just gonna be pancaking dudes all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where Abe falls in. And I think his versatility as a lineman is great. He takes every challenge personal. He's just a dog out there. And yeah, he makes a lot of difference. And he plays clean ball too. Mike Jarrell, bless his heart, Stone Forsyth, they were out there doing their best, but they were committing a lot of penalties. Damn the blocking for a second. They just weren't playing clean. Abe didn't have no penalties yesterday or Sunday. That's huge. That's makes all the difference in the world on a team that was literally the third most penalized coming in to Sunday. So yeah, I think Abe's a difference maker in a huge, huge, huge way. He's not perfect, but I mean, every line is better in the NFL if you get your best dude back.
Yeah,
I don't care what team you are.
What do you expect on Sunday? We got a different beast coming into town. I mean, Arizona's playing great football. Kyler Murray. I mean, I think there's a lot of people, probably myself. You wrote him off last year, and he's bounced back this year. He's completing damn near 70% of his passes. His touchdown interception ratio is incredible. He's running the ball. I mean, they're efficient. Connor's running hard. They got a good offense. It's year 2 under Gannon. It's all coming together for him right now. What do you think the keys are to it? How do you slow him down if you're Mike Macdonald?
Yeah. Connor or Kyler?
Kyler.
Both.
Yeah,
Kyler.
or both. Yeah.
I think the key to getting to Kyler is going to be, it's going to be keeping him in the pocket because he's not a step up guy. He's a step out guy. Jalen Hurts is very similar. You kind of Russell is like that too. You just flush him one way, and you can kind of bottle him a little bit. Also, Kyler, as well as he's throwing the ball, he's like really happy with his feet, which can get him in some trouble. He hasn't thrown a lot of picks. I think only 3. But he's one of those guys who, if you can get him maybe to throw one early, you get him off his game or something like that. But their offense is really, really good. You know what it is, Puck? It's what the Seahawks want to be. They're really vertical and explosive, because last year their offense was just awful. They had no vertical threat. It was like Greg Dortch not running by nobody, or whatever his name was, Michael Wilson from Stanford. I like him. No one was scared of running by him. It's the same problem the Chargers had when their 2 best receivers were Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. It's like no one's running by you, on that offense. That's why they went and got some speed, the kid from TCU. So, the Cardinals now with Marvin Harrison Jr., they have this vertical offense, this vertical passing game, but a physical run game. Yeah. It's a great mesh. That's really what the Seahawks are trying to accomplish. They want DK to scare you for the defense, but they also want Ken to scare you. So, and I think with Connor and Marvin Harrison and Kyler, they're accomplishing that at a really high level right now. I expect you're gonna have to bring your hard hats. Like this is gonna have to be a really hard hat game. You can't miss tackles. I mean, what's gonna be key, Puck, is not missing tackles in open space. Like you can miss a tackle like Devin can miss a tackle if Kobe's right there to clean it up. Ernest can miss a tackle if Tyrese is right there. That's football. That happened on Sunday. They missed tackles, but guys were right there to clean it up. I think that's going to be huge on their offense. I think James Conner leads the league in missed tackles force right now. So
and getting better with age. That's not supposed to happen with running backs.
Yes, I mean some of it I think is also just guys learn how to take care of their bodies a lot better with modern medicine too. But there's an art to playing running back. It isn't just being young and fast and elusive. Like it's setting up your blocks. It's knowing the timing of blocks. Saquon's been really good at that this year, playing behind that Eagles O line. Like James has really mastered that. It's not just hitting the hole hard. It's timing. It's pacing. It's trusting your blocks. But I really think where the Seahawks are going to have a chance in this game is. Quiet as kept, the Cardinals defense is just Budda Baker and some dudes. Like it really is. Like no one really moves me when I watch the tape of them. They have some guys who have made some advantageous plays. Garrett Williams, one of their DBs, has made a couple picks this year, I think. But for the most part, I mean, Budda has like 100 tackles, and then it's just everybody else. Their leading pass rusher, I think, has like 3 sacks. They're one of the worst pass rushing teams. Their run defense is bad. The third down defense is average. Pretty much everything is average or bad except for their red zone defense, I think is top 10. So I really think this is the game where take the over on the Seahawks points if you think they're going to win, because they should put up a 30 ball against a defense that's been playing well, but I think their numbers are cooked a little bit from playing the Jets and the Bears the last couple weeks. You look at they were the team that played Tua in his first game back. I think they gave up like 27. So, yeah, I think this is the game where Geno and those guys should put up a bunch of points.
47.5 is the number. 47 and a half, 50 degrees. I think it's going to be, I think it's clear, maybe a little cloudy. I don't think the weather's going to be a factor. And you're telling me, the Dugar Report is telling me take the Seahawks on the over.
I don't know if the Seahawks are going to win. I think I just like the over. I got to watch a little bit more of, I got to watch the Seahawks offense again, because I thought it was really interesting. It looks like a light bulb might have come on for Grubb with the shotgun stuff. He used his
what do you
highest
mean in terms of what?
He was using under center very seldom to start the year, and he used it, I think, at his highest rate against the Niners, particularly in the run game. He's running this college-y offense, and I get it. He's from college, but their run game is not good enough to run it out of shotgun as often as they were, and a lot of Ken's runs on Sunday were under center. They were better in short yardage on Sunday. All of their conversions running the ball in short yardage were under center, including their touchdown by Ken, so I think that's why I said the light bulb might have come on for Grubb. Like he was trying to bring his offense to the Seahawks, which he's still doing, but like, dude, it's the same lesson Cliff Kingsbury learned way too late. It was like, dude, you eventually got to get out of that college mindset, dude. You got to play some big boy ball, have your quarterback get under center, and just knock the hell out of people.
It's interesting though, because that system though, being under center, if you go back and watch his calls at Fresno, they were under center a ton. It's weird because he's had almost like these two different offenses that he and DeBoer ran. There was like a Fresno offense, and then there was a Washington offense. And then they kind of mirrored, then they meshed them. But, when they were running it, running it down there in Fresno, but they had Jake Haener on the shotgun, a great deal, but they had they were a lot of under center looking like an NFL offense. I mean, he had 2 1,000-yard backs, one year that he was calling plays down there. So it's always been back there, but I agree with you. You did see the difference of him going under center. I love running under center. I love giving different looks. I think when you're in the shotgun the whole time, it's the same look. And I think running backs I think they like a downhill. They like a little momentum when they get the ball, and it's hard to have momentum when you're out of the shotgun.
Yeah, and there are some teams who run well out of the shotgun. The Ravens have been one. The Eagles do a lot of like pistol and shotgun. Like you can do it, but you have to be good at it. Like there's nothing more aesthetically displeasing, I guess, than a bad shotgun run. Like they just look so awful when they don't hit.
Slow developing.
Yeah, it's real slow. Your back doesn't get any speed, and it just looks completely terrible. Right. Like it doesn't look nearly as bad as if an under center run doesn't hit, but a shotgun run, just aesthetics. I'm nothing quantifying this. Just watching the games, I'm like, oh my God, ew. Like it's the only thing that makes me just say ew when I watch a game is a bad shotgun run.
I'm with you.
Oh man, so I'm glad Grubb maybe did some self-scouting over the bye week and was like, hey, let's get out of that because it's not working. It wasn't working.
All right, that's the Dugar Report. Michael-Shawn Dugar every Thursday here at 11 o'clock. Of course, you can read all of his work at The Athletic. Follow him on Twitter at Mike Dugar, co-host of the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast with Chris Kidd. You can find that podcast anywhere where you find your podcast. What do you got cooking right now at The Athletic? What are you working on? What do you got up there right now?
Man, I think since they finally won a game, I think I can like write about how someone's playing well. No, seriously, like no one cares about like how the writers have to deal with this stuff, but man, it's so hard to like. I've had some stuff in I've worked on, and then they lost a couple of games in a row, and then it just it was hard. I was trying to do something on Spoon, but then he tackled poorly in Atlanta, and I was like, okay, let me shelve that, So I think I want to do something. I should have something on JSN this week. Wow. I think he's doing what we all expected he would do. I talked to DK. I asked DK this week, like, hey, did you watch him much in college before you guys drafted him? He was like, nah. I was like, did you go back and watch him after you guys drafted him? He was like, no, I watched the Rose Bowl. I was like, that's all I needed to see. And you kind of forget he went bonkers in that game. Like he's a guy who had 300 in a game, It's like throwing him these little bubble screens every once in a while. I'm like, nah, man, let that dude eat, And I'm glad that light bulb seems to have come on for Grubb, maybe out of necessity against the Rams, but now out of like desire against the Niners. So
last 3 games he's been absolutely incredible. All right, go read all of Mike's work again at The Athletic. Listen to the Seahawks Man-to-Man podcast with he and Chris Kidd. Again, find it wherever you find your podcast. Follow him on X at Mike Dugar. Again, Michael-Shawn Dugar every Thursday here, the Dugar Report. If you catch it later also on YouTube, subscribe and leave a comment there. Also on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Of course, always one-stop shop up at pucksports.com.